given you just mentioned ancient history, I think it's quite interesting to put into context our struggles with anxiety in society today. And of course, not everyone struggles with anxiety by any means. That you offer some stats in the book, and you quote Thomas Jefferson, I think, and how he described anxiety, not his own anxiety, I don't think. I don't know whether you could remember the quote or give us a synopsis of it, but it's interesting, isn't it? Because I'm sort of fascinated to know whether we've always had, give or take, spikes due to, say, a pandemic, whether we've always had in human society roughly the same levels of anxiety, but perhaps we just didn't used to talk about it in the way that we do today, or whether in the absence of certain circumstances, societies can shift up or down on the anxiety curve.
Yes, I think I quoted him because it highlights how, anxiety has probably been there, for a long time. I don't remember the exact quote. I don't know if you have it in front of you and you can read it, but basically he talks about, all the things that we worry about that could happen that never will happen, and I think even Mark Twain is often quoted as saying things like that. All the worries, all these things, that we think will happen will never happen. I don't know if you
how much pain has been caused by worrying about things that never happen. That's the gist of it, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's beautiful. He really captures it, and this shows that historically, it's not that, suddenly we have this modern scourge of anxiety. Although I will highlight, we've seen a huge spike in anxiety in the last year. And so when there are times of uncertainty, so for example, with a pandemic, when somebody has never experienced a pandemic before, none of us alive have experienced a pandemic, that level of uncertainty can really drive spikes in anxiety. And I think that can also get fueled by social media, something that, they didn't have back in the 1800s. They would, if somebody's panic and anxious, they would have to write a letter and they would have to hand it to the person on the horse. And then the person on the horse would have to write, I'm just making this up, but, it takes a long time for people to correspond. And so the social contagion was much less of a problem back in times before we had ways of instant communication. So I think that piece is somewhat unique in terms of how quickly we can, anxiety can spread like wildfire, how quickly panic can spread like wildfire, but that capacity to be anxious, that capacity to worry about the future is something I think that humans have had for a very long time.
How do we stick with this? How do we stick with your suggestions? Because it's so tempting, isn't it? I mean, we talked about willpower and how tricky it can be to combat some of our anxieties, but how do we stick with your recommendations? And if there's one bit of advice that you think would be most helpful to us if we suffer from anxiety, what would it be?
Well, how we stick with this is really to see how quickly we can see significant gains in anxiety. So, our brains are always looking for quick fixes, and they're very susceptible to somebody saying, I've got the magic bullet, I've got the magic bullet, I've got the magic bullet, the pill or the elixir or the technique or whatnot. So here I would say, we've really got to stay focused on the science because, the hallmark of science is reproducibility. The neuroscience that I talked about today has been known for a long time. Eric Kandel even got the Nobel Prize showing that this is evolutionarily conserved back to the sea slug. So here, I don't think the science here is going to change. And so how we stick with this is really to see, okay, what's it like when I just map out my own habit loop around anxiety, around worry? Does that help me start to see a benefit already just by illuminating my own mind? For the vast majority of people, that in itself is a huge step forward. So how we stick with this, I would say, is really ramping up our curiosity. So the curiosity helps us see, am I running to a quick fix? Versus, am I really seeing something where I'm seeing benefit over and over and over? Is it reproducible in my own experience? And also, I think curiosity is good at the beginning, good in the middle, and good at the end. So at the beginning, curiosity helps us start to map out our habit loops. Oh, what's my worry habit loop? What's my compensatory habit loop? It's good in the middle where we can ask ourselves, oh, what am I getting from this? So we can help update that reward value process in our brain. And of course, it's good at the end because it itself can serve as that bigger, better offer. When we're anxious, we can get curious. Oh, what does this anxiety feel like in my body? So the one thing I would say is really think of curiosity as your superpower along this entire process.
And having spent so much time looking into this, both in the lab and face-to-face with patients, and then put down these thoughts on paper in your book, are you broadly speaking optimistic or pessimistic or somewhere in between as regards our capacity as societies to get on top of anxiety?
Well, I think it's easy to get dragged down by negative news in the world, but I am inherently an optimist. And part of this is because in the research that I see over and over and over, curiosity and kindness are so much more rewarding than anxiety, than divisiveness, than anger and things like that, that it is literally baked into our brains to move in that direction. The other reason I'm an optimist is that it really just takes awareness, seeing these things clearly. When I'm a jerk, what does it feel like? Oh, not so great. When I'm kind to somebody, what does it feel like? Oh, much better. So the more we can bring awareness in, the more we can just tap into what our brains are already set up to do, which is to be curious, which is to be kind, which is to be connected. And that's why I'm internally an optimist on how not only individually can we work with this stuff, but even collectively. I think we can come together with kindness, with curiosity, with connection to actually make a significant benefit or a significant difference in the world for the better.
Two more quick questions from me, and then, as it won't surprise you, lots of questions from the audience. Can't get through all of them. Very quickly, why do you say all we need is love, as the Beatles would have sung?
Well, not only is that a great song, but here, this goes back to this kindness piece. All we need is love is because our brains are set up to be kind, to be connected, as compared to be divisive and being mean to each other. And the all we need part is that it's more rewarding to be loving, to be kind, than it is to be mean to each other.
Do you worry, though, about the algorithms on some social media apps that might promote division and antagonism?
I do, because I think they are set up, they're kind of these agnostic robots that are just set up to maximize profits for the companies. My hope is that there are leaders of those companies that have a conscience where they can see, okay, this algorithm, it's kind of going out of control. Let's help tweak it, or maybe have, saving the planet as part of our bottom line as compared to just maximizing our profit. So yes, I think these can be really dangerous just because they are so powerful. Yet they can also be powerful for good as well. It really depends on the people, and their decisions on what they deem to be important.
And Judd, as you address in the book, what would you say to those people listening or watching who would say to you, but without my anxiety, I wouldn't have made such a success of my career, for example?
Yeah. Here, I would say it's something for you to explore yourself, but it is probably your brain fooling you, because our brains love to make associations. They love, if we're anxious and then we do a good job on at a presentation or a performance, our brains then associate, anxiety with the performance. Yet there is no causal link, and the science shows just the opposite. The more anxious we are, the worse we perform. There's no causal link between that anxiety and the performance. So here I would say you've got to look to see, is that actually causal? Is that anxiety causing the improved performance, or is it actually getting in the way? And the way to test that is to compare that to times when you weren't anxious. And uniformly, people perform better when they're not anxious. And I think of the extreme opposite of anxiety is flow, or being in the zone, as some people describe it. When we are so far away from anxiety, we're just crushing it, as they say. That's when we're doing our best, whether it's in sports or in music or in business. We're just totally immersed in what we're doing. And at those moments, we are not anxious at all.
So Sandra asks, is anxiety caused by nature or nurture?
Yes, the answer is yes. So certainly we can have genes that predispose us to feeling anxious. Some people feel more anxious than other people. Some people get caught up in worry more than other people. The key here is we don't have control over our genes, at least not right now, and probably not for some time, but we do have control over our nurture and the piece of how we work with, whether we've learned, let's say we've learned a worry habit loop. If we've learned that, we can actually unlearn it. I guess another way of putting this is some of my patients benefit from medications, and there's some genetic component there. The medication is very helpful, but all of us can benefit from understanding how our minds work, and all of us can learn to work with our minds.
So sorry, because her question was an either or. Is it caused by nature or nurture?
Yeah, and I was answering that it's both.
It's both, got it.
Okay. It's both nature and nurture.
Anonymous question here. It says, you talk about stress, the stress of overeating. What about not eating? Once anorexia takes hold, there's more at play than reward value, this questioner asserts. Can your techniques help here?
Yes. So with, anorexia, so we'll get to the anorexia nervosa, which is the psychological condition in a moment, but let's talk about anorexia itself. Anorexia was actually a descriptor of our natural physiologic response when we're in danger. So the idea is if we're being chased by the saber-toothed tiger, that's not the time to stop and have a snack. So when we are in danger, our hunger mechanisms actually go away, and we shunt all of our blood to our muscles as compared from our digestive system so we can run. So that's a normal physiologic response. Yet with anorexia nervosa, there can be a learned component where often, and I see this in patients in the clinic, where there's this, you're wanting to have control, for example, or wanting to have a certain body image, and then there's a reward of seeing oneself a certain way, and that reward is achieved by basically starving oneself. And so with anorexia nervosa, it's the same process at play. The trigger might be that they have a certain thought of a body image. The behavior would be to starve themselves, literally. And then the reward is, I'm actually in control, or I'm feeling good about this, even though their body is screaming at them to eat because they're starving themselves. So here, we can actually bring awareness practices in to help us see, how unrewarding that component is itself. I'll just highlight anorexia nervosa is a very challenging process to treat. And so often it takes the help of, healthcare providers, often an entire team of folks to work with somebody, because that can get so deeply ingrained in somebody's mind.
Sue has a fascinating question. Professor Brewer, she says, our superpower of noticing what is wrong, that keeps us alive, etc., seems to be genetically pre-programmed. Will we have to teach every human born to take on this antidote superpower, to be curious and kind, to notice what is good and right? Or is this alternative superpower genetically available, and do we just have to let it win?
So I think it's a both and. So the fear response, if we look at the time scale, if there's danger, we're immediately going to have this fear response, and we're going to, fight or flight. We're going to make that danger go away, either by fighting whatever it is or by running away. Here, the curiosity happens at a slightly different time scale. When there's a little bit more breathing room, the curiosity helps us survive by helping us explore our environment. If you think of our ancient ancestors, when they ran out of a food source, they had to get curious and start exploring, okay, where am I going to find food? So both of these help us survive, but in different ways, and both can complement each other. And so it's not one or the other. It's actually nurturing. Well, I'm not sure that we have to nurture the fear response because it is so ingrained. But here, I think often we do have to nurture our curiosity, especially in modern day, where we are constantly trained to move away from discomfort, from adversity. And so here, when there's something that is different, so for example, with reentry, a lot of folks are nervous. Oh no, what's it going to be like? It's about leaning into that discomfort. Oh, this is different as compared to, oh no, this is dangerous.
Question here from Sandra about anxiety and whether it's more common in Western countries than in poorer countries. And if so, isn't part of the reason that our problems are typical first world problems, so-called, we have the luxury to be able to worry about certain things that people wouldn't worry about in poor countries?
Yeah, this is a good point. It's actually backed up by research. I write about a few studies that highlight this in the first, I think the first chapter of my book, where basically you can think of environments or countries where generally we have shelter, we've got enough food, we're not in danger. So we can then start worrying about the future. When we don't have time to worry about the future, we're focused on right now. And so there can be less anxiety there. So it's often described as the worried well. And that happens, that tends to be higher in places where, they're more developed countries where we've got, the food, we've got the shelter, and we're not in danger.
Just rattle through 2 or 3 quick further questions, because there's some really good ones. If somebody, says Lucy, consciously understands that anxiety is unhelpful, but their brain has become wired to overthink or to worry, aside from consciously understanding that anxiety is actually unhelpful, how can you rewire the brain to stop overthinking and worrying if it has become an automatic response? How can you work with the unconscious?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So this is about bringing the unconscious to the conscious. And this is why we have as the first step, or that first gear, mapping out habit loops. And so any of us can go back, at night, we can reflect on our day and see, okay, how many times had I been habitually worrying about something? We can start to map that out. What that does is it brings the unconscious to the conscious. It brings the automatic to the non-automatic, where we're mapping those out. Once we've mapped those out, then that plants that seed crystal where then the next time we're worried, we can even set an intention. Okay, next time I'm worried, let me see if I can catch it. And it might be right after we're worried that we catch it. And then as we catch it afterwards, we start to catch it as we're worrying. And so we can kind of back into it from this unconscious and consciously mapping it out to the just after, to the during, and then even to the before we start to worry. We can see, oh, here's a situation where I might worry. Let me really bring some awareness in.
Jane just wants to know what the web address is for the mapping tool that you talked about a little earlier.
Yes, it's mapmyhabit.com. And also, I've got a bunch of resources. I think that's also available on my website, which is a shorter URL, which is drjud.com, DrJud.com.
And Megan says, do you address anxiety as a result of ADD in your book?
In the book, I don't touch on that specifically, although that can be used. So if somebody has anxiety, or ADD, for example, is the trigger, and they start to worry based on the ADD, yes, that is addressed in the book as an overall mechanism.
Let's finish with Victoria's question. Can anxiety be completely healed? It's a very good question.
What a great question. Well, I would say there is, in the time that I've been a psychiatrist and a neuroscientist and a researcher, there's only one condition that I truly believe in, and it's one that we all share. It's called the human condition. And as being human, we're going to have emotions come up. So in terms of the completely healing process, it's not going to be that we're never going to have sensations on our body come up, because those sensations are there. They say, oh, is there danger here? And so that's actually something we don't want to go away. What we can completely heal is our relationship, how we relate to those sensations. Those sensations do not have to spill out into anxiety. That part is optional. That part is something that we all can heal.
It's been so interesting talking to you. I mean, there are clearly challenges. We're still living through a pandemic. As I said, social media can be very damaging. I don't know whether there are actually algorithms that encourage dissent, or not dissent, but division. But certainly you can see certain tweets, can't you, that are divisive, doing better than bland, uniting tweets. So there are lots of challenges that we live with. A lot of people have very personal challenges with anxiety, but talking to you and listening to you suggests to me that there is plenty of scope for optimism. Now, your book, as I said earlier in my introduction, Unwinding Anxiety, is available for people to buy right now. I've really enjoyed talking to you, Professor. I hope you enjoyed it as well, from all those miles away in America, in your mini national gallery.
Thank you. I did very much enjoy the conversation, and these were great questions. So I want to thank the audience for jumping in as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone who tuned in this evening. As you know, we've got a massive schedule of events coming up through the next few months. So please do go to the How To Academy website and you'll be able to sign up to more. And as I say, you can get Professor Judson Brewer's book online right now, and I'm sure in bookshops too. Thank you to everybody. Thank you particularly to you, Judd. Stay well and stay safe.